Well, many CEOs have announced they've been stepping down this year, quite a few recently resigning or retiring. When appointing a new chief executive, we have to ask, do quotas exist to ensure racial advancement and equality? That's one of the issues in our economy. Joining us now to talk more about the appointment of CEOs and how they are headhunted is Andrew Woodburn, who's MD of Woodburn Man Limited. Morning, Andrew. It's good to see you again. We have a shared past in some respects at SA Breweries. We worked there together for a time. And you've been at African Bank, and you're now in the family business, really, isn't it, Woodburn Man, with your father, Trevor, having founded the business, I think?
Correct.
So a long experience in the headhunting business, as it's crudely called, executive search.
We prefer it to be called.
Executive search, yeah. Now, what prompted me to ask you to come in was that the resignation of Brian Damas, and I thought, here's Eskom. If any corporate, the country depends on it functioning well, it's Eskom. And we had the financial director resigning. I think he announced it in January, he left in July.
Correct.
We had Brian Damas, according to one report, he told the board in February or a long time ago he wanted to go. So you have an important financial position vacant, you have the CEO position vacant, and no announcement of its chief executive. Am I being unreasonable in expecting a company like Eskom to have one ready or to move very quickly to appoint one?
David, it's a good question because in most cases companies of that scale will have a plan of sorts in place. Now, good succession planning takes in the region of 18 months to, at minimum, an emergency solution. But in most cases, Eskom, and in Eskom in particular, you've seen a number of CEOs moving through the system at sort of shorter lengths of tenure than one would probably like. Plus, added to which, the state-owned entity has another level of complexity, which is the political perspective on the deliverables of the company. So is your expectation that they should be ready? I would say that the company would have some thinking behind it. But in this case, it's so complex that in some cases, it's not as easy as it might seem, or be if you were merely a privately owned business.
Well, let's first talk about the governance aspect from the company point of view, and then we'll talk at it from the point of view of the individuals who are resigning after relatively short times.
Yes.
And I always like to hammer Transnet and Eskom. They talk about their shareholder and their profit, and actually it's a government institution.
Correct.
So who's in charge? Is it the minister or is it the board? If it's the minister, why have a board? But the worrying thing is that there is a board with a fiduciary responsibility, but if the minister's actually calling the shots, then we have things falling through the cracks.
So yeah, it's a valid question, and some of what goes on is not necessarily publicly available. But what is mandated is that the minister does have the right to make or vet the decision at a point in time. Now, not for all roles, but for those leadership roles, the minister will have a view depending on which department the minister is sitting in and where the state-owned entity falls under their responsibility.
Let's look at these individuals. Damas, he's an Eskom veteran, no question about him being a competent guy. Yeah, 87, I think he joined, engineer, sounds right. 3 years. And I mean, I don't know if it's not mathematically proven, but often the term that people talk about, you need 6, 7, 8 years as a chief executive to come in, settle in, get the organization moving around what you want to do, start doing things, consolidate them, and maybe you've done what you want to do. 3 years is surely too short. So what is the thinking here? Is it because they can't cope, the pressure's too great? Is it that the conditions make it very difficult to achieve what you want to achieve?
Obviously, I can't comment on this particular instance, but what I can say is obviously that the state-owned enterprises have a huge amount of complexity. And when I use the word transformation, it's not necessarily the obvious element of transformation of merely moving from the old staff percentages to the new, but they have to transform their mandates. Often they have to transform their business models as well. So often CEOs are tasked in these kind of organizations with a lot more complex challenges than, let's say, defending an electronics business or growing a retail business, where they have more freedom.
Or even a bank where you've got lots of pressures, but there's a business model.
So these models have more complexity from the influences on them and bigger challenges from the transformational agenda over multiple areas. And at a point in time, I'm guessing senior leadership in its entirety, both as board and exco, have to have a look at how to navigate this.
Also, the affirmative action, the equity area, I mean, it's a difficult subject to talk about, but it's there.
Yes.
You've got to accept it. We've had several chief executives who are not white in the old classification, who have, we've had Roger Jardine from Avenge, we've had Nkululeko and Nayeze Hambata at ArcelorMittal.
Yeah.
We've had Brian Damas ArcelorMittal was quite a long time, but short terms, Roger Jardine. Is there additional pressure, do you find? And in your hunting for the right people to take positions, the pressures are enormous on an equity candidate because so much is expected. They must deliver.
And they look to do great things. So first of all, they are in a situation where they will be role models for many other executives who are climbing the ladders. Second of all, the complexity of the environment they put in is massive. And lastly, they are really looked to do great things. But what is happening is more systemic, actually. So first and foremost, we have a seller's market, not a buyer's market for talent. So there are very few top executives with the right skills and many opportunities for them to be used in. So that's a difficult market to work in. Second of all, if you were a bright, up-and-coming, previously disadvantaged, or let's say black South African executive, you've got some choices to make. Why would you take a hugely complex state-owned enterprise opportunity with massive challenges and a shareholder who might be imposing on you other requirements, where you could go into the private sector, have the freedom to do what you want, leverage your skills effectively, and in some cases have and get more reward for your success?
Isn't there also an issue with, yes, the chief executive doesn't always have to be an engineer if it's an engineering company, but if you get someone from outside, these are complex sectors. One thinks of construction and building power stations and distribution. Now, Damas was from that environment, but Jardine came from outside the engineering environment. Tough ask to come from outside the environment, like a bank, for example, to come in from outside and know where everything is and just have the feel for it.
So, very interesting question in the context of what I would call modern corporate leadership. The first thing is that traditionally one would say your leader needed the credibility of the functional expertise. So if you were in an engineering business or a construction business or an electrical business, they would need some functional background to be credible to make the calls. And to a certain extent in some industries that still holds. But more and more businesses are understanding that it's actually the corporate leadership skill set that's required to be successful. In this country, unfortunately, we have a deep pool of functional expertise. Engineers like Brian who spent their entire career in that sector and have that as a base. What we haven't invested in to a great deal in this country is the leadership expertise. And even in this week of the end of Tata Madiba's reign, so to speak, his life has come to an end, people are reflecting on the leadership capacity that he had, not necessarily that he was a technocrat. In fact, he wasn't. He was, some would say, a revolutionary and brought our country into a new age. So there's one example of how somebody who wasn't necessarily functionally
but then also the people looking,
but they're few and far between.
And the people who ask you to look for people for them need to think differently perhaps. It's not enough to have the qualifications and the experience and everything. You've got to have that extra something, but perhaps above all the appetite for the tough, complex jobs. And I mean, in SA breweries, we both remember lots of strong egos there, ambitious people. You've got to have an appetite for the top job.
Absolutely. It's what we call career ambition. And some executives are driven by what I call the inside fire. Why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing? And believe it or not, global research tells us it's not the money. Actually, there are many other requirements that drive executives to great heights. The money comes if you achieve those great heights. If you're there for the money, it's not going to happen in most cases. So it is for an executive to understand what is driving them, why they're there. And many will tell you it's the strategic challenge, it's the opportunity to make a difference. I was just talking to a senior executive this week who said he creates huge satisfaction from seeing his fingerprints on things. And so those are often the inner drive that puts an executive into a place to take that stress, to face those challenges head on, and sometimes to make unpopular decisions. Well, it's very lonely at the top.
Look at Mandela. There were times when he was alone, attacked from all sides, but he was determined to carry on. Last question, maybe you're involved, maybe you're not. I know you're very secretive, you guys. How long is it going to take Eskom typically? I mean, how long is it going to take before they appoint someone?
So let me talk to you quickly about a traditional search. A traditional search process would take the best of the internals and the best of the externals, compare them, and we don't hesitate to recommend the very best people to our client. But at the end of the day, the client's decision is paramount. It's their decision and they're going to live with it over time. About 3 months to conduct a good executive search is what the traditional time period would be, and then a notice period from there on to take your selected executive away from where they are and introduce them to your environment.
Of course, there are other factors. You may feel that the shareholder, government in this case, wants a black person for this job.
Correct.
Wants a South African for the job, or both.
Yes.
Or might be saying, look, get us anyone from anywhere in the world as long as they can run this utility.
So David, good question. Our clients, we like to work with clients who say the following. We would like the very best person for this opportunity, no matter where they come from. But the complexity of South Africa sometimes mean we would say it would be advantageous if they were either a black person, a female, a South African, an engineer, or whatever it might be. And the client has the ability to specify those requirements.
Well, I'd love to hear the conversations between them and people like you, but of course we never do. Been great to see you again, Andrew Woodburn. He is MD of Woodburn Mann Limited.